Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and this morning I've got Matthew Dickerson on the line in Studio 2, and we're here to talk about last night's meeting, which was to do with the committee's meetings. There were three different ones, but the one that I found the most interesting was the one which is the Culture and Community Committee, starting off with the report of the sister city committees, particularly in relation to what's happening there with Wellingtons.
That's a very good question, Tony. I'm not sure what activity we've got coming up for the sister city committees in relation to Wellington. And one of the things that's a difficult one after the amalgamation was the two sister cities that Dubbo had and then the sister city that Wellington had threw all those things into a bit of disarray in terms of organisation. And then, of course, COVID came along and put a full stop on all of that. So what we've got to do is start getting to the point where we're getting some activity happening again, that we've actually had a retirement of our sister city officer. And so that obviously threw some planning out. We've got a new sister city officer starting. So effectively, it's really about getting it back, if you like, and getting some action happening, getting some exchanges happening. I'm not actually even aware, Tony, what used to happen specifically with the old Wellington sister city and in terms of exchanges and the activities that occurred there. So it's really a matter of getting things back up and going and looking at the programming over the next 12 months.
Okay, I can tell you that we did have student exchanges and visits both ways. And in fact, my daughter was involved with one of those.
Oh, there you go.
And the report of the Wellington Town Committee, I had a quick look at that. I couldn't see that much happening in the report. Would you like to throw any light on that?
And this is one of the things that's an interesting process in terms of the way that these occur. You've got almost three levels of process in some of these. So the Wellington Town Committee met, so that's got a couple of members in terms of council members, mostly community members. They have their discussions. The minutes out of those go through to the standing committee meetings, and then those minutes go forward to the council meeting. The idea is that all the discussion, all the intricate discussion that might have happened at that particular meeting, and I wasn't at that particular meeting, then that's all discussed. But the only thing that gets reported in the minutes is any outcomes from that. So any discussions that you need some action from, those actions go forward again to the standing committee meetings and then go further forward to the actual council meeting to be formally resolved. So it's one of those slight anomalies there that people look at the reports that go through at our standing committee meetings and they say, well, what do they do? What happened at those discussions? And you don't really get a full overview of what happens out of those apart from actions that are required. So to get really a pretty good look at that, you've got some things that were discussed. You've got the Wellington Street Tree Master Plan that was discussed, the delivery program operational plan that was discussed or brought forward just to look at. So there were various things talked about. There were some questions asked and answers given in terms of that meeting, formal questions asked in terms of sent through forward before the meeting. But then any resolutions from that need to be taken forward. Now, at this stage, all the standing committee meetings did was note that meeting occurred and note those minutes. No specific actions are required from those particular minutes. So the good thing about it is it gives you three bites at the cherry. If there's something that you need to have taken forward, if there's some action that needs to happen from one of our various community committees, and we've got about 16 of those, then you've got one chance at a committee meeting, another chance at a standing committee, and then finally at the council meeting itself.
Okay. And you touched on the Wellington Street Tree plantings or master plan. There's a few things in that. The Public Spaces Tree Committee report was, I believe, a different committee.
It is.
So, but the Wellington Street Tree Master Plan, how's that going?
Yeah, good. So that's now been noted, and again, it'll be resolved if nothing changes in a council meeting in a fortnight's time. There was a slight amendment to the master plan after it had been out on public submissions, out on public display, and then we got 14 submissions from that, which I think for that report in the Wellington community, that's quite a reasonable number of submissions, and it was really just some couple of amendments, clarification of the priority planting plan through the inclusion of the proposed replacement species column, inclusion of rusty jacket into the planting list, and the elevation of Percy Street along the Wellington Primary School precinct to a priority 1 planting site. And then effectively the rest of the master plan was adopted by the Standing Committee, but again, that's only a recommendation to be adopted by Council. And then all the submissions are in those business papers as well. So you can look at those submissions, not who put the submissions in. We don't think that would be fair to those individuals, but you can read the full submissions from those people that put those in. So thank you to the community for being engaged and involved in that process and actually putting submissions in. And hopefully people see some of the results of those submissions in both the changes to those reports and what might happen with the budget at Council.
Okay. There's been a review of the public tree removal or amenity valuation policy. So you might like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. People might want to remove trees. They might want to take a tree and say, well, it's not needed anymore. And you can request a public tree to be removed. And an example might be if you've got a fence and just on the other side of your fence in your yard, there's public space. It might be a footpath, for example, and there's a tree there that's annoying you. It's dropping leaves on your roof or it's got branches coming over you're a bit worried about. And you say, well, I just want to get rid of that tree. I just want to get that tree taken out and that's it. Then there's a process to go through that. But the process is not just about the cost of the tree in terms of, the cost of the removal of the tree. The actual value that you would have to pay as a community member would be the cost of the removal plus a value attached to that tree. And so in the past, I think people have just said, well, a tree, that's easy. You cut it down, you go and plant a tree somewhere else and away you go. But I think trees are more important than that. And if we want to actually improve our tree canopy, then I think the idea is to actually get something where there's a bit more value placed on trees. And so some people have a bit of a heart attack sometimes. If we put a value on a tree, they say, well, it's not going to cost that much to knock it down. It won't, but the value of that tree in our community. So essentially, as a result of that last night, if it goes through the council meeting in a fortnight's time, we'll have a report that will be tabled at the July meeting of council that will basically have some more details around the value that might be associated with those trees. And let me say this, it's probably more value associated with a tree than most people would think of, and there are some formulas that are used to actually calculate those. But the bottom line is that you might be expecting to pay a few hundred to get rid of a tree, but it might be $10,000 or $20,000 you might pay for a tree to be removed. So it's something that we really want to make sure we have out there in the public arena, make sure people are aware of that before we actually make it a permanent policy.
I can see there could be some debate about that. Now, there's also the Dubbo Regional Council tree preservation order for public trees and significant tree register. So that kind of backs that up, does it?
No, it's a little bit different. And this is one where some people would like, there are some people or organisations even in our community that would like us to protect trees not only on public space but on private space. So if you had a tree in your backyard, you can't knock that tree down, you can't do things to that tree without getting some sort of formal process or formal permission. At the moment, the process is that we have a significant tree register. So if there's a tree that is of significance, it can be asked to be nominated or added to the significant tree register. If it's added there, then it can't be changed or significantly modified or removed without getting permission from council, and that permission may well be denied. There aren't a lot of trees on the significant tree register, and there's a process to go through to put them on there. And again, some people would like to see us much harsher on the removal of trees. Other people in the community say, well, it's my backyard, I'm allowed to do whatever I like in my backyard. Both answers might be the extreme. The answer might be somewhere in the middle. So going through and looking at that, and I suppose just making sure that people are aware of that whole process is an important part as well. But the significant tree register is the mechanism we use at the moment to protect those significant trees on private land. And again, other councils do it differently. So it's, I suppose, basically just one of those things that it was really for notation, but just making sure, reminding people about that process.
Okay. So just another question in relation to the trees, Matthew. So if someone plants a tree in their backyard, and the idea is, you want a bit of a tree cover, but after a period of time, you have it in the back of your mind that once it gets too big, I need to remove it or replace it or trim it. Then where do you stand with that?
So at the moment, as it stands, if you did that in your backyard and it grew and you wanted to cut it down, lop the branches, whatever you want to do, you can do that unless you've got a neighbour or a friend who looks at that tree one day and says, gee, that tree's significant. I think I want to get that tree added to the significant tree register. Even though it's not their tree, they could make application to council. If our council officers, including our arborist, agreed to that, and obviously you'd be informed as a tree owner, it would get added to the significant tree register, even if you didn't want it to be. And so then, if that happened, if you wanted to make any changes, you'd need to get council permission, which, as I said, may well be denied. The reality is there aren't many trees on the significant tree register. There aren't many people who have gone through that process. So mostly people in their own yards pretty much take care of their own trees as they see fit.
Okay, and the last thing on the list there that I think is important is there was a submission for a partnership agreement between the Wellington Aboriginal Actional Panel, which is known as WAP locally, or WAP. I must say that probably a lot of people in the public don't know about that committee, but it's a very important one. So what's happening with that?
Yeah, so this is basically on the back of the agreement that we have with the Dubbo Aboriginal community. We have a formal MOU in place, which we did a signing of sometime towards the end of last year, and the Wellington Aboriginal Action Panel, or I actually like to call it the WAP, Tony, because it's got the double A in the middle rather than just WAP.
Yes.
So the WAP reached out to council and said that they think it would be worthwhile for them to have an agreement in place as well. And so, again, council thinks that's a reasonable idea. It's gone through the committees. The committee recommendation is to, yes, go forward with an MOU. And if that's resolved at council in a fortnight's time, then we'll sign that particular MOU. And again, I think the importance of something like that is that it just gives some rules of engagement and gives a formal agreement between the Aboriginal community in say, Wellington in this case, and Dubbo Regional Council, so we can go forward together and work on solutions together. And I think that's really what, from my personal perspective and really from council's perspective, it's really about seeing how we can work as one big community together. And if that means some agreements with different organisations and different parts of the community, then I think that's fantastic.
Okay, Matthew. Well, just to wrap up, the last question basically is there anything else that's in there that has escaped my attention that you might want to talk about?
No, nothing in there in particular that relates to Wellington. It was a busy meeting. Actually, the committees sometimes don't go for that long, but it was quite a late meeting last night, so there was a lot in there to be discussed, a lot to be worked out. Probably, I think the only other thing that was important from an overall perspective was probably in relation to our building summary. Now, one of the issues with the building summary is that it gives a building summary for the Dubbo Regional Council area. So I can't give you a specific breakup for Wellington and some of the work that's going on in Wellington and some of the information from Wellington. It is one reporting, and maybe that's something that we need to look at to see if there's a better way we could report that to break up the communities. But it looks pretty strong from our overall building approvals. And if I look at just the summary for this year, and if I extrapolate that out a little bit and say, based on our current run rate, if you like, what we'll do this year, we'll probably have about 225 single dwellings approved across the LGA, 215 other dwellings approved, so 440 in total. And as a comparison to last financial year, there were 323 approvals given last financial year. Even if I go back pre-pandemic, we're looking at, say, the 2019-20 year, there were 210, the 2018-2019, 277. So 440 approvals across the entire LGA is fairly strong in my opinion. So that's a good sign that things are happening. Again, I do apologise from a Wellington perspective. I haven't got a break-up between Wellington and Dubbo. That's just the overall LGA.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Matthew, for your report today. And we've been talking to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council on Binjang 91.5.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate your time.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.